Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be thinking about how you might build a piano accompaniment when you're working from a lead sheet. Because quite a lot of lead sheet music, obviously what are you going to be given? You've got a melodic line and you've got some chords. So first of all, what do these chord symbols mean? How do we find the chords? But really, how do you actually play them on the piano or the keyboard? And that's what we're going to be focusing on. So let's have a look at the piece of music on the screen that I've just put together for this purpose. First of all, this is how the melody goes. So, just imagine for a moment that this could be part of a song, maybe the end of a song. And I've purposely written a melody that's got lots of movement in it. We've got lots of quavers or eighth notes because it's a chance just to think about, well, how do we handle all of those as well? But you can see that I've put in red the chords from the lead sheet. So let's have a quick reminder or a quick examination of what these chords actually mean. We are in the key of G major, so that just helps you to kind of root your mind in a key. So if we just see a letter like G, it's telling us that it's a major chord. So a G major chord, which is G, B, and D. Or you might think of it as chord 1 in the key of G major, or the tonic chord. But if you're just thinking, well, I don't understand all that, but how do I know what a major chord is? Well, if we're starting with G, that's telling us G is the bottom note of the chord. And to find a major chord, if you count semitones or half steps from that G, count 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 semitones, 4 half steps, 5, 6, 7. So if you've got 4 and 7 semitones or half steps, you've got a major chord. So that's another way of working that one out. Okay, you'll see that some of the chords have a little M after them because they're minor chords. So this one here, this E minor chord, if you're in the key of G major and you're used to being able to think in keys and you're used to a Roman numeral system, you'll be thinking that's chord 6 in G major. If you're thinking, I wouldn't know what chord 6 was if it fell on me, that's absolutely fine. What's a chord of E minor? Well, E is the printed note, so that's the note that's at the bottom of the chord. And if we want to find a minor chord, count semitones or half steps again from this E. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So if you have 3 and 7 half steps or semitones, you have a minor chord. So 4 plus 7 is major, 3 plus 7 is minor. So that's a very quick way of finding those out. So obviously C is a C major chord, so we can see how that goes as well. But we've got other things on here, haven't we? So let's look at some of these. What about this one? G/B. Well, when you have what's called a slash chord, the letter in front of the slash, to the left of the slash, is telling you what the chord is. So this is saying it's another G major chord. So you've just played a G major chord here, a G, B, D chord, and guess what? You're going to play it again. What is happening after the slash on the right hand side is that B is saying play a G major chord, but this time don't put G at the bottom of it, put B at the bottom of it. So if I take my G major chord, my G, B, D, the first chord at the beginning here says put G at the bottom. So here's G at the bottom with my G major chord. And as long as I use the notes G, B, D, I can arrange my right hand, if you like, any way I want. I can have it there or here. It doesn't really matter. As long as I'm using the notes G, B, D, and G is at the bottom. But when we come to this G/B chord, that says Use the notes of the G major chord, the G, B, D, any way you want, any octave you want, that's entirely up to you. But this time, put B in the bass. So I would do something like this. Any of those things would do. That's a G/B chord, a G major chord, but with B in the bass. Now, depending on what your kind of musical upbringing is, you may say to me, oh, that's a first inversion chord. Absolutely right, because if you have a G major chord and G is at the bottom, we say that's a root position chord. If we have the same chord, G, B, D, but B is at the bottom, we say it's in first inversion. If we have the same chord, but D is at the bottom, we say it's in second inversion. So G/B is another way of saying it's a G major chord in first inversion. If you're into Roman numerals, you'll call that a 1B chord or a 1/6 chord. So that's what that means. So you can see we've got other slash chords, like for example, here there's another slash chord. And I've purposely tried to demonstrate something else that's going on here, because you might look at this and you think, well, hang on a moment, that doesn't make any sense. Because if the letter to the left of the slash is telling us about the chord, well, the chord's C. So C major is C, E, G. And remember, you can, if you're not sure about what a C major chord is, it's a 4+7 on the half steps or semitones. But then you're telling me that you want to put D in the bass. Well, there's no D in this chord. It's simply C, E, G. So where have you got D from? Well, all this is saying is use a C major chord in your right hand probably, but put D in the bass. So even though it's a slight clash with the chord, nevertheless, that's what is being asked for. So sometimes when you have a slash chord, the bass letter, if you like, on the right of the slash will belong to the chord, and maybe it's just put in the chord in a different inversion. Sometimes it will be saying, yep, the composer definitely wants you to use a note that doesn't belong to the chord. And it will make sense in the musical context, because this is a C/D chord going to a D7 chord. Say more about that in a minute. If I go C/D, then I go to a D, you can see it sounds good. So all is well with that. So that's slash chords, and you can see other examples of that during this piece of music. Now, the other thing you can see here is every now and again, I'm putting a little 7 after something. So what's all that about? Well, a 7 is indicating an extension chord. Let's have a look at one of these. Let's have a look at this D7. Well, the D is a D major chord. So what's the D major chord? It's D, F sharp, A. How do I know that? Well, a D major chord, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's a 7 and a 4 chord there, isn't it? If you count in the half steps or the semitones. If you know what a D major chord is anyway, you don't need to count them, that's fine. If you're into Roman numerals, you'll be saying, this is chord 5 in the key of G, because it's built on the 5th degree of the scale. There's G, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's a chord built on that, a major chord built on that. It's chord 5, or the dominant chord. Different people know these things by different names. Okay, so there's a D major chord. Now you'll notice when we have these chords, they're kind of built with these notes a third apart. We've got D something, F something, A something. So the F something, in this case the F sharp, is a third above D. 1, 2, 3. And then we have a 5th, 3, 4, 5. So we kind of build the chord in notes that are a third apart. We have a root, a third, a 5th. So if we extend the chord, if we're going 1, 3, 5, the next note in the sequence is 7. So 7th chords are very popular. So you can have a 7th chord. If you want to extend it further, you go for 9, 11, 13. And you don't go beyond that, because when you get to 15, you're back with the bass note that you started with. So that's how extension chords work. So if you see a chord, you know, a D chord or an A minor chord or something, and then it says 7 or 9 or 11 or 13, that's telling you about extension chords. So this D7 chord, the D means D major, D, F sharp, A. The 7th means stick a C on the top of it. Now, how do I know if it's a C natural or a C sharp or whatever it is? If you know your intervals, it's going to be the minor seventh above the bottom note. If you're thinking, what's he talking about now? Well, we're in the key of G, and this key signature at the beginning is telling us you're going to have F sharp in it. So the scale is G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. So we use, every time we come to F, we use F sharp because that's in the key, but all the other notes are naturals. They're not sharps. So if you're thinking about the D7, if you were thinking, well, here's D major, D, F sharp, A, and obviously I'm using F sharp because I've counted the semitones, but F sharp is in the key anyway. Well, the seventh will have to be C natural because in the key of G major, C is natural. It's not C sharp or C flat, it's C natural. So the different ways in which you can be sure about that. So there's a D7 there. What about this one back here? This is an A minor 7. Okay, so what's the chord of A minor? It's A, C, E. How do I know that? Well, there's A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's a 3 and a 7 if you're counting the semitones or the half steps. That's A minor. If you're into Roman numerals, you'll say, oh, that's chord 2 in G major. That's fine. And maybe you can hear that minor chord as well. So we've got a 7 written after this, haven't we? So here's the A minor chord. It's a root, a third, a fifth. So the 7th is G. That 7th is a minor 7th above the A in the bass. So that kind of makes sense. Also in G major, G is G natural. It's not G sharp or G flat, so it must be that chord. So there's an A minor 7 chord. What about the chord that follows? This is A minor 7 / D. So we've just found the A minor 7 chord, but this time we're going to put a D in the bass. And it's another one of these slash chords where you're thinking D doesn't belong to A minor 7, but that sometimes happens. So we've got A minor 7 over D going to D7. And then you think, oh yeah, that kind of blends in quite nicely, doesn't it? So having explained that, you now know how to find all of those chords. Next job is, well, okay, that's great. I found the chords. You might want to live with those, just rehearse them, getting from one chord to the next. It's kind of like, yeah, but how would I actually play that if I was playing it on the piano or the keyboard? Well, what we've got here is a kind of fairly straightforward realization of the lead sheet. In other words, I've just tried to kind of write down one way in which you can do it. So if the first chord is G, well, it's a G, B, D chord. I've got my G in the bass, then I've put B and D, and then I've just put another G above it. So there's my G chord. Now, if I want to, I can just put down a chord there, hang on to it until the chord changes. So when the chord changes, okay, here's a new chord. What have I done here? This is the same chord, the G major chord, but notice we've now got B in the bass. So I've gone from a G chord to a G chord with B in the bass. And I'm just holding onto the chords unless the lead sheet is suggesting that we have to change the chord. Okay, so you don't have to worry about, I've got all these extra notes in the tune. I'm just putting the chords down. A minor 7, well, we've talked about it. So what have I got here? I've got an A minor 7 chord, which is A, C, E, G. So what have I done here? I've got A in the bass. I've put the G there, the C there, and the E at the top. So I've got this chord. But you could kind of lay that chord out in a different way, as long as it's using the notes A, C, E, G, and you've got A in the bass. That's entirely up to you. Then we've got this slightly more complicated chord, the A minor 7 / D. So I'm thinking, I've got to have notes that belong to A minor 7, but then I've got to have D in the bass. So I've written this at this point. And you might say to me, hang on a minute, where's the A gone? Well, you could put A in the keyboard part very easily, but A is already in the tune. So we've kind of got A, C, E, G, and then I've got that D in the bass. You could easily add it Or you could just think, well, someone's singing it or playing it, so I'll just do the rest of the chords. That's your choice. Then, of course, this note's being held on, but the chord changes while that note is being sustained. So I've had to change the chord there, and we've gone to a D7. So we talked about D7, D, F sharp, A, C. So what have we got? We've got the D still sounding. We've got F sharp. I haven't got an A in it, but again, I've got the A up there, but I've got the C in there still because that's still sounding like that D is still sounding. And when you move from one chord to another, instead of jumping about all over the landscape, it's kind of worth thinking, actually, I might as well keep that D there because I need D in the bass for both chords. I've got that C there, I need that for both chords, so I might as well hang on to it. And these parts, if I organise them nicely, they just have to go by step. So I get this progression, which is kind of smoother than suddenly going, or something like that, where you suddenly think, what happened there? All the notes suddenly flew in the air. So kind of repeating notes that are common from one chord to the next is a good idea. Keep them at the same pitch if you can. Or other notes that need to move, well, what's the nearest position we can find for them so we don't have to leap all over the landscape? A few leaps are a good idea sometimes, but generally speaking, kind of smooth it out. Then I've gone on to an E minor chord. So we said E minor is E, G, B. So do you know, I've just kept it nice and simple, E, G, B, and the melody goes on above all that. So you see how that's working. And then I've got a G/B. So this is a G major chord, a G, B, D, but B is in the bass. Now this is an interesting one. It's a G7/B. Now, let's look at G7 for a moment. The G chord is G, B, D, but I said when you have a seventh, it's a minor seventh. Now that means it's an F natural. And you might say to me, hang on a minute, I thought in G major there's supposed to be an F sharp. Yes, but when you have a seventh chord, use a minor seventh. If you know about intervals, that's easy. If you don't, it's slightly more complicated, but that's how the minor seventh works. A major seventh would be an F sharp, but this is a minor 7/B, so I've got that B there. So really this G7 chord is just pulling us slightly out of the home key of G major. It's suggesting a little bit of C major. And we're using a little device here called a secondary dominant when we go from chord 5 to chord 1 in a different key. And it's going from 5 to 1 in C major, and it works as a secondary dominant because chord 1 in C major is also chord 4 in the home key of G major. So that's how a secondary dominant works. Don't have to worry about that. If you're thinking, oh no, I don't want to know about secondary dominants, that's fine. But the G7, minor seventh above the bottom note there. So there is your F natural. So I've just included that F natural there. As you see how I've managed to do that. But I've sustained these notes because they fit both of these chords quite happily. Then there's a C major chord, a C, E, G chord. So I've got C, E, G, as I said, put them in any order you want. G/B, so that's a G, B, D chord. So I've got B in the bass because that's what it says after the slash. G and D are there above that B in the bass. A minor 7 we said was A, C, E, G. So what have I got? A, C, E, G. So it's just kind of finding a spacing of the chord that you're happy with. And when you're spacing the chord, it's not a bad idea to think about 3 notes in the right hand, 1 note in the left hand, or 2 notes in the right hand, 2 notes in the left hand. And you can vary it in a piano part. Sometimes you want 4 parts, sometimes you just need 3. Sometimes you might want some more just to fill out a corner. You can make an artistic decision. What sounds good? What you don't really want is 1 note in the right hand and 3 notes in the left hand. Lots of people do this kind of stuff. And you hear the effect of that. The left hand's really thick, grumpy, kind of fed up with the world stuff, isn't it? But the minute I put 3 in the right hand and 1 in the left hand, the spacing is much cleaner, isn't it? So it's better to have the upper notes together and have the bass slightly separated from the upper notes, or to have this 2+2 thing. So you'll soon hear what sounds good. Just to finish off the chords then, C/D, we talked about that one, and you can see I've got my C major chord, C, E, G, with D is in the bass, and then I've gone for a D7, so that's D, F sharp, A, C, that D still sounding, F sharp. I haven't got an A here, but if you want to miss out the 5th of a chord, you can do that. But I've got my C there, that 7th is still there, and then I've doubled up the D here, and the F sharp is doubled up in that voice at the top, and then finally a G major chord, so G, B, D. And what I've done in the piano part now, because that singing note or instrumental note is just being held, I'm thinking not a bad idea to get a bit of movement here. So I've got a G major chord in the right hand, I've got G at the bottom, and then I'm thinking I could just kind of come up the chord in quavers or 8th notes. G, D, G, and then this A is what we call a passing note. It's just passing between 2 notes that belong to the chord by step, and finishing on a G major chord and putting the G back in the bass. So all the way through, there are quavers, 8th notes in every bar, every measure of this vocal line or instrumental line. And then suddenly that soloist is not going anywhere. So that's when we want to get busy on the piano. And it's perfectly legit to say for the rest of the time, well, I don't need to be busy in the piano part or the keyboard part because the other line is being busy. How do we account for these notes in the melody line that don't belong to the chord? We said this is a G chord, a G, B, D chord. So we've got G, we've got B. The G chord continues, so we've got D, we've got D. Those are all what we call the harmony notes or the chord tones. The other notes don't belong to the chord, but this is a passing note or a passing tone. It passes by step between the note before and the note after. So a passing note or a passing tone have to pass by step from the note before to the note after. So 3 notes going in one direction, 3 notes up or 3 notes down. Here's another one, because that is a passing note. That belongs to the chord, that belongs to the chord. So they're harmony notes or chord tones. That is a passing note or a passing tone. This thing here is called an upper neighbor tone or an upper auxiliary note. In other words, D belongs to the chord of G major, G, B, D, and we've gone D, we've gone up 1, and then we've come back to D. That note that goes up 1 is an upper auxiliary note or an upper neighbor tone. If it had gone down to C, that would have been a lower auxiliary note or a lower neighbor tone. So a melody can embellish the chord using these things we call inessential notes or non-chord tones, and it will sound okay as long as they belong to kind of one of these categories of inessential notes or non-chord tones. So the piano part or the keyboard part sounds like this. And I've just used that one passing note or passing tone in the piano part there. Well, you might think, well, that sounds a bit boring. But actually, if you put it with the melody, what you've got is this. So you see how it kind of effectively accompanies that melody. Okay, I'm not being over busy in the keyboard part. I'm spacing the chords so we don't get that thick, grumpy stuff down at the bottom. And I'm using all of the instructions from the lead sheet, but we're kind of blending everything together. If you want to have a keyboard part that's a little bit busier, Well, I've done another version of the same thing, just using things like passing notes, passing tones here in the keyboard part, just to make it a bit more interesting, just having a little bit more movement when the melody note is kind of stationary there. Another passing tone there, another one here. Just sort of varying it by having a C major chord in one octave going to a C major chord in another octave. The G/B chord in one octave followed by one in a different octave. So even though we're generally speaking not leaping around, sometimes those kind of textures can make for a little bit of variety temporarily, as long as you don't overdo it. So this time, my piano part, exactly the same plan, but it sounds like this. And I've just sort of spread that last chord to make it sound a little more kind of pianistic, if you like. So this is a bit more involved. Now you may prefer the simpler version, or you may say, oh, actually, yeah, I prefer this kind of slightly more engaged version. Much would depend on the mood of the song you were writing. If it's a song, what are the words? It would sound something like this combined. Gives you the idea. So it's slightly more kind of florid, slightly more intricate accompaniment in that second version. So I hope that gives you a few ideas about reading off a lead sheet. Well, what do the chords actually mean? How do I interpret those? But then how do I go about actually writing something that would be a piano part or a keyboard part? Or how would I go about improvising something where I'm being faithful to the chords, but kind of thinking about the spacing of them, thinking about how busy I'm making my accompaniment, and how do I vary it a little bit as well. So hopefully, that's triggered some thinking that is useful to you in dealing with lead sheets when you are trying to build a piano accompaniment or a keyboard part to go with a lead sheet. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, let me invite you to the Music Matters website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. Lots of exciting material there, huge number of resources to help you with your onward musical journey. Our kind of motto is really to be empowering to musicians. So lots of people learn to play an instrument, but they don't really kind of know the nuts and bolts of what's going on, or they get stuck with things like today's topic. Well, we're doing our best to enable you as a musician to do all the things that you need to do and to understand the nuts and bolts of what's going on behind that. If you go to the website, you'll be able to click on courses, loads of courses there that might be of interest to you. One of those is a creative songwriting course. So just following on from what we've just been doing, a lot of songs these days will be written in lead sheet style. So if you want to really think about, well, how do I write a really good melody for a song? How do I deal with words? How do I deal with chords? How do I choose these lead sheet chords? How would I then go a bit further with kind of realizing those into an actual accompaniment? Well, there's a huge amount of detail in that course. So if you're a songwriter and you're thinking, I'm just getting frustrated because there are things about songwriting I don't get, not quite sure how to do things, that could be a really empowering course. Or if you're thinking, what I'd love to do is to write a song, never tried it, that would also be a great starting point. We're looking at songs all the way back to the 1600s, coming up to the present day, and we're looking at a lot of contemporary songs. We compose a number of things together through the course, and that will give you absolutely hundreds of ideas and hopefully fire your imagination for writing your own songs in your own style. So that's the creative songwriting course. Have a look at that in particular, but see what else is there while you're on the site. www.mmcourses.co.uk.